Well, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me on this video. Got a phone call the other day from an agent saying that she was just in the process of selling a property that had oil heating. And she said, is there anything I need to be concerned about? Kind of like if you're selling a property that has an airtight wood-burning stove or a fireplace, you have to be concerned about wet certification. Is there anything you need to be concerned about with oil heat? And the answer is not officially, you don't, but there's some things I want you to keep in mind. It used to be that most of the sales we put through were oil heating. These days, they're few and far between. I've run across some in years past where the oil tank wasn't in the basement, it was actually buried in the ground. There you want to be concerned about environmental issues, and certainly if you're representing the buyer, you want to put something in there where they're going to make some kind of an examination on the soil and make sure there hasn't been any seepage or leakage from the tank. But let's suppose it's in the basement, it's a 200-gallon oil tank, and it's got an oil furnace and it's active and functioning. First thing that comes to mind is adjustments. Used to be, there were a number of things on closing where we say subject to adjustment. You're paying so much money subject to adjustments. And certainly taxes are one that current we still concern ourselves with, and the buyer has to make allowance for how much money they got to come up with depending on where they are in the year and where they are as far as tax installments have been paid. Used to be that you assume the fire insurance policy. That doesn't happen anymore. But you do make adjustments for oil heat. What's typical is the seller will fill the tank right up to the brim, and then the buyer is charged for 200 gallons of oil. Well, maybe they don't know that that's what's going to happen, and all of a sudden on closing there's an adjustment of $800 to $1,000 for oil for the oil tank. They're prepaying for their heating for the winter, if you like. And so you got to prepare them for that, for the adjustment. But what if the buyer tells you, I don't like oil heat, I don't want to keep oil heat, what I'm planning on doing is ripping out the oil furnace as soon as I can and putting in gas heat? That's fine, and I understand that, and they can certainly do that, but perhaps if that's the case, you don't want them to inherit a 200-gallon oil tank full to the top if they're planning on ripping things out. It's a challenge as it is to get that oil tank out of the basement. Certainly it's a problem if it's full of oil. So in that case, you may want to say that the seller and buyer acknowledge that the home is currently heated by oil, and they agree that there will be no adjustment for oil on closing. However, it's the purchaser's desire to transform the home from oil heating to gas heating, and as such, the seller will do their best to try and see that the oil tank is as close to empty as possible when it comes to closing. Now, depends on what time of the year. If you're closing in January or February, you may want to continue with oil heat till the spring and then change the furnace. But you want to keep that in mind. Give some thought to that. Make sure that your buyer tells you what their future plan is for oil or for gas. If they're going to continue with oil heating, and that's fine, they certainly can, then there's no problem with just prepare them for the concept of adjustments. If they're planning, this is just a secondary note, if they're planning on changing from oil to gas, make sure when they make that conversion, they notify the oil company to stop delivering oil. I have a friend who had a permanent home on a lake and he had oil heat. There wasn't gas available in his area, but he decided he was going to change from oil heat to propane heat. And so he pulled out the furnace, put in a new furnace, and didn't notify the oil company. Oil came along, the spout was still outside of the house where they fill the oil tank, so the oil company came, hooked it up, and filled his basement full of oil. Well, that's an awful mess, and what a problem he's going to have, but it got worse than that. He had a drain in the basement floor, but because he wasn't on sewers, he had it going out to the lake. He figured, well, it was only for any seepage that might come in from water in the basement, and it would just go out, it wasn't any problem. So he ended up with 200-300 gallons of oil going straight out to the lake. Well, he had the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Ministry of the Environment, and the Cottage Association all down his neck, as you can certainly understand. So there's some things you want to be sure of. If you're going to change from oil to gas, make sure you close that spout off and make sure you notify the oil company. Hope that makes sense. Thank you very much for sharing this video. I look forward to talking to you again very soon.